Gates of Imagination proudly presents Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis in a new translation by Ian Courtney Johnston, brought to life by the voice of Arthur Lane. Chapter 1. Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from unsettling dreams, finding himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous insect. He lay on his back, which felt as hard as armor, and as he craned his neck slightly, he saw his large, brown, arched abdomen. It was segmented into stiff bow-like sections. The blanket, threatening to slide off completely, barely clung to his form from that vantage point. His numerous legs, pathetically thin compared to his now enormous circumference, flailed helplessly before his eyes. What in God's name has happened to me? He wondered, his mind reeling. It wasn't a dream. His room, undeniably a human room, albeit a bit cramped, remained undisturbed within its familiar four walls. Above the table, cluttered with an unpacked array of fabric samples, a testament to his life as a traveling salesman, hung the picture he had recently clipped from a magazine and placed in an ornate gilt frame. It depicted a woman wearing a fur hat and boa, seated erect, holding a large fur muff towards the viewer, her entire forearm swallowed within its depths. Gregor's gaze shifted to the window. The dreary weather outside, with rain drumming audibly on the metal windowsill, deepened his melancholy. Why not just sleep a little longer and forget all this nonsense? He mused, hoping to escape the bizarre reality. But that was impossible. He was accustomed to sleeping on his right side, a position now unattainable. No matter how forcefully he threw himself onto his right side, he invariably rolled back onto his back. He must have tried 100 times, shutting his eyes to avoid the sight of his wriggling legs, finally giving up when a faint, dull ache, unfamiliar to him, began to throb in his side. Oh God, he groaned inwardly. What a demanding job I've chosen. Day in, day out on the road. The stresses of the trade far outweigh the work done at head office, and then there are the constant travel problems, worrying about train connections, the dreadful irregular food, and these fleeting superficial human interactions that never touch the heart. Damn it all. He felt a slight itching sensation on his abdomen. Slowly he edged closer to the bedpost, arching his back to raise his head more easily. He located the itchy spot, now covered in small white spots he couldn't identify, and attempted to touch it with a leg, but he immediately recoiled, the contact sending a shock like a cold shower through his entire being. He retreated to his original position. This early rising, he grumbled to himself, makes a man a complete idiot. A man needs his sleep. Other traveling salesmen live like sultans in a harem. When I return to the inn mid-morning to finalize orders, those gentlemen are just sitting down to breakfast. If I dared to do that with my boss, I'd be fired on the spot. Yet who knows, perhaps that might actually be a good thing. If it weren't for my parents' sake, I would have quit ages ago. Would march straight to the boss and tell him exactly what I think, straight from the heart. He'd fall right off his desk. It's absurd how he sits up there talking down to his employees. And because he's hard of hearing, you have to practically stand in his lap to be heard. Anyway, I haven't completely abandoned that dream yet. Once I've saved enough to pay off my parents' debt, another 5 or 6 years perhaps, I'll do it for sure. Then I'll make a clean break. But right now, I absolutely have to get up. My train leaves at 5 o'clock. He glanced at the alarm clock ticking steadily on the chest of drawers. Good God, he thought, panic rising in his chest. It was 6:30, the hands moving relentlessly onward. Past the half hour, almost 6:45. Could the alarm have failed to ring? From his vantage point, he could see it was correctly set for 4 o'clock. Surely it had rung. But was it possible to sleep through a noise loud enough to shake the furniture? Disais. Admittedly, his sleep hadn't been peaceful, but evidently he'd slept more deeply than he realized. What should I do? He wondered, his mind racing. The next train departed at 7. To catch it, he'd need to rush madly. His sample collection remained unpacked, and he certainly didn't feel particularly fresh or energetic. Even if he managed to catch the train, he couldn't avoid a confrontation with the boss. The firm's errand boy would have waited for the 5 o'clock train and already reported his absence. That spineless, witless creature was the boss's favorite. Perhaps I should call in sick, he considered, but that would be incredibly embarrassing and suspicious, considering his perfect attendance record over the past 5 years. The boss would undoubtedly arrive with the company doctor, berate his parents for their lazy son, and dismiss any objections with the doctor's pronouncements. In his eyes, everyone was perfectly healthy but simply work-shy. And realistically, would the doctor be entirely wrong in this case? Aside from an overwhelming drowsiness after this prolonged sleep, Gregor actually felt quite well and possessed a remarkably strong appetite. As these thoughts collided in his mind, preventing him from making the decisive move to leave the bed, a gentle knock sounded on the door near his head. "Gregor," a voice called softly. His mother. "It's 6:45. Don't you want to be on your way?" That soft, familiar voice. Gregor was shocked to hear his own response. It was undeniably his voice, yet layered with an undercurrent of a painful squeaking, distorting the words so that they were only clear for a moment before dissolving into an unrecognizable reverberation. He couldn't be sure he had even heard himself correctly. Gregor wanted to offer a detailed explanation, but in his current condition, he simply said, Yes, thank you, Mother. I'm getting up right away." Fortunately, the wooden door muffled the change in Gregor's voice, and his mother seemed reassured by his words. She shuffled away. However, the brief conversation had alerted the other family members to Gregor's unexpected presence at home. His father began knocking on the adjacent door, weakly but insistently. Gregor, he called out. "What's going on?" After a pause, he repeated the call in a deeper voice. "Gregor!" Meanwhile, his sister knocked lightly on the other door. "Gregor, are you all right? Do you need anything?" Gregor directed responses to both sides. "I'll be ready right away." He painstakingly articulated each word, inserting long pauses to mask the unusual quality of his voice. His father returned to his breakfast. The sister, however, whispered, "Gregor, open the door, I beg you." Gregor had no intention of opening the door. He congratulated himself on the habit, ingrained from his travels, of locking all doors during the night, even at home. First, he wanted to get up quietly and undisturbed, get dressed, and most importantly, eat breakfast. Only then would he contemplate his next move. He recognized that pondering the situation in bed wouldn't lead to any reasonable solution. He recalled previous instances of minor aches or pains felt in bed, perhaps from an awkward position which vanished entirely upon standing. He hoped his current bizarre fantasies would similarly dissipate. He was certain that the change in his voice was nothing more than the onset of a common cold, an occupational hazard for commercial travelers. Throwing aside the blanket proved surprisingly easy. He merely had to push himself up slightly and it slipped off. But proceeding further was difficult, mainly due to his unaccustomed width. He needed arms and hands to push himself upright. Instead, he possessed only numerous small limbs, moving incessantly and uncontrollably in various directions. If he attempted to bend one, another would immediately extend itself. Even if he finally managed to manipulate one limb as desired, the others, as if released from restraint, thrashed about in an excessively painful agitation. "I mustn't remain in bed uselessly," Gregor told himself, steeling his resolve. Initially, he attempted to get out of bed with the lower part of his body, but that section, which he hadn't yet examined closely and couldn't clearly visualize, proved stubbornly immobile. The attempt proceeded with agonizing slowness. In desperation, he hurled himself forward with all his might without thinking. But he chose his direction poorly, slamming hard against the lower bedpost. The intense pain confirmed that his lower body was, at that moment, likely the most sensitive part of him. Therefore, he attempted to maneuver his upper body out of the bed first, carefully turning his head towards the edge. He managed this relatively easily. Despite its newfound width and weight, his body mass slowly followed the turning of his head. But as he finally extended his head beyond the bed and into open air, he grew apprehensive about moving further in that manner. Should he allow himself to eventually fall in this way, it would take a miracle to avoid a head injury. And above all, he couldn't afford to lose consciousness right now. He decided to remain in bed. However, after another similar struggle, lying there sighing as before, witnessing his small limbs battling one another even more fiercely than before, and seeing no possibility of imposing calm and order on the chaotic movements, he told himself again that he couldn't possibly remain in bed. Sacrificing everything if it offered even the slightest hope of escaping the bed might be the most reasonable course of action. Yet he also reminded himself of the potential benefits of calm, even the calmest reflection over hasty decisions. At such moments, he directed his gaze as precisely as possible towards the window. Unfortunately, the morning mist offered little reassurance, concealing even the opposite side of the narrow street. "It's already 7 o'clock," he noted at the latest chime of the alarm clock. Already 7 o'clock and still such a fog. He lay quietly for a while longer, breathing shallowly, as if waiting for normal, natural conditions to re-emerge from the stillness. Then he declared to himself, "Before 7:15 strikes, I must be completely out of bed, whatever happens. Besides, someone from the office will arrive to inquire about me. The office opens before 7. He exerted himself to rock his entire body length out of the bed in a uniform motion. If he allowed himself to fall in this way, he planned to lift his head sharply during the fall to avoid injury. His back seemed hard and resilient. The fall shouldn't cause any real damage. His greatest concern was the loud noise the fall would inevitably create, which would likely arouse concern, if not outright fright, on the other side of the doors. Nevertheless, it had to be attempted. As Gregor was in the process of lifting himself halfway out of bed, the new method felt more like a game than an ordeal. He only needed to rock in a steady rhythm. He realized how much easier it would be with assistance. 2 strong people, his father and the cleaning lady came to mind, would be sufficient. They would simply need to slide their arms under his arched back, lift him out of the bed, bend down with their burden, and then patiently ensure he completed the flip onto the floor, where he hoped his diminutive legs would finally find their purpose. Now, quite apart from the fact that the doors were locked, should he even call out for help? Despite his distress, he couldn't suppress a smile at the very thought. He had reached a precarious equilibrium requiring constant rocking to maintain his balance. He would soon have to make a final decision. In 5 minutes, it would be 7:15. Then the doorbell rang. "That's someone from the office," he thought, his blood turning to ice as his small limbs danced frantically. For a moment, everything fell silent. They aren't opening the door, Gregor thought, clinging to a fleeting, absurd hope. But inevitably, the cleaning lady, with her resolute stride, went to the door and opened it. Gregor needed only to hear the visitor's initial greeting to immediately recognize the manager himself. Why was he, Gregor, the only one condemned to work in a firm where the slightest lapse triggered immediate suspicion? Were all the employees collectively considered scoundrels? Was there not a single truly dedicated individual who, if they missed a mere couple of hours of work, would be consumed by conscience and genuinely unable to rise from bed? Was it truly necessary to send the manager himself, rather than simply tasking an apprentice with an inquiry? And in doing so, to broadcast to his entire innocent family that investigating this suspicious circumstance required the manager's superior intellect? Driven more by the agitation caused by these thoughts than by a reasoned decision, Gregor swung himself with all his might out of the bed. There was a loud thud, but not a true crash. The carpet cushioned the fall somewhat, and his back proved more resilient than he'd anticipated. The dull noise was less conspicuous than he'd feared, but he hadn't held his head up sufficiently and struck it on the floor. Irritated and in pain, he turned his head and rubbed it against the carpet. "Something has fallen in there," the manager said from the next room on the left. Gregor tried to imagine whether something similar to his current predicament might have befallen the manager at some point. At least one had to concede the possibility. However, as if to dismiss such a notion, the manager took a few resolute steps in the next room, his polished boots squeaking audibly. From the neighboring room on the right, his sister whispered, "Gregor, the manager is here." "I know," Gregor muttered to himself, but he didn't dare raise his voice loud enough for his sister to hear. "Gregor," his father now said from the neighboring room on the left, "Mr. Manager has come and is asking why you haven't left on the early train. We don't know what to tell him. Besides, he also wants to speak to you personally, so please open the door. He will be good enough to forgive the mess in your room." Amidst all this, the manager called out in a friendly tone, "Good morning, Mr. Samsa." "He is not well," his mother explained to the manager while his father was still speaking at the door. "He is not well, believe me, Mr. Manager. Otherwise, how would Gregor miss a train? The young man has nothing in his head except business. I'm almost angry that he never goes out at night. He's been in the city 8 days now, but he's been at home every evening. He sits there with us at the table and reads the newspaper quietly or studies his travel schedules. It's quite a diversion for him if he busies himself with fretwork. For instance, he cut out a small frame over the course of 2 or 3 evenings. You'd be amazed how pretty it is. It's hanging right inside the room. You'll see it immediately as soon as Gregor opens the door. Anyway, I'm happy that you're here, Mr. Manager. By ourselves, we would never have made Gregor open the door. He's so stubborn and he's certainly not well, although he denied that this morning. I'm coming right away, Gregor said slowly and deliberately, remaining motionless so as not to miss a single word of the conversation. My dear lady, I cannot explain it to myself in any other way, the manager replied. I hope it is nothing serious. On the other hand, I must also say that we business people, luckily or unluckily, however one looks at it, very often simply have to overcome a slight indisposition for business reasons. So, can Mr. Manager come in to see you now? His father asked impatiently, knocking once again on the door. No, said Gregor firmly. A painful silence descended in the neighboring room on the left. In the neighboring room on the right, his sister began to sob. Why didn't his sister join the others? She'd probably just climbed out of bed and wasn't even dressed yet. Then why was she crying? Because he wasn't getting up, wasn't letting the manager in, and was in danger of losing his position, which would in turn cause his boss to badger his parents with renewed demands. Those worries were probably unnecessary at the moment. Gregor was still here and had no intention of abandoning his family. At the moment, he was lying right there on the carpet, and no one who knew his condition would seriously demand that he let the manager in. Gregor wouldn't be casually dismissed simply because of this minor discourtesy for which he would devise an easy and suitable excuse later on. It seemed to Gregor that it might be far more reasonable to leave him in peace at the moment, instead of disturbing him with crying and conversation, but it was their very uncertainty that distressed the others and excused their behavior. Mr. Samsa, the manager was now shouting, his voice raised. What's the matter? Or barricading yourself in your room, answering only with a yes and a no, making serious and unnecessary troubles for your parents, and neglecting, I mention this only incidentally, your commercial duties in a truly unheard-of manner. I'm speaking here in the name of your parents and your employer, and I am requesting you in all seriousness for an immediate and clear explanation. I am amazed. I thought I knew you as a calm, reasonable person, and now you appear suddenly to want to start parading around in weird moods. The chief indicated to me earlier this very day a possible explanation for your neglect. It concerned the collection of cash entrusted to you a short while ago, but in truth I almost gave him my word of honor that this explanation could not be correct. However, now I see here your unimaginable pig-headedness, and I am totally losing any desire to speak up for you in the slightest. And your position is not at all the most secure. Originally, I intended to mention all this to you privately, but since you are letting me waste my time here uselessly, I don't know why the matter shouldn't come to the attention of your parents. Your productivity has also been very unsatisfactory recently. Of course, it's not the time of year to conduct exceptional business, we recognize that, but a time of year for conducting no business. There is no such thing at all, Mr. Samsa, and such a thing must never be so cease. But Mr. Manager, called Gregor beside himself and, in his agitation, forgetting everything else. I'm opening the door immediately, this very moment. A slight indisposition, a dizzy spell has prevented me from getting up. I'm still lying in bed right now, but now I'm quite refreshed once again. I'm in the midst of getting out of bed. Just have patience for a short moment. Things are not going so well as I thought. But things are all right. How suddenly this can overcome someone. Just yesterday evening, everything was fine with me. My parents certainly know that. Actually, just yesterday evening, I had a small premonition. People must have seen that in me. Why have I not reported that to the office? But people always think that they'll get over sickness without having to stay at home. Mr. Manager, please take it easy on my parents. The criticisms you're leveling against me now are truly unfounded, and frankly, nobody has breathed a word about any of this to me. Perhaps you haven't reviewed the latest orders I shipped out? Besides, I'm about to embark on my trip on the 8 o'clock train. This brief rest has already rejuvenated me. Mr. Manager, don't linger. I'll be at the office in person momentarily. Please be kind enough to relay this message and extend my deepest respects to the chief. While Gregor rapidly uttered all this, scarcely comprehending his own words, he had effortlessly maneuvered closer to the chest of drawers, likely benefiting from the practice he'd inadvertently gained in bed. Now he was attempting to hoist himself up onto it. In truth, he desperately wanted to open the door, to reveal himself to the manager and engage in conversation. He was intensely curious to witness the reactions of those inquiring about him upon seeing his transformed state. If they recoiled in shock, then Gregor would be absolved of all responsibility and could find some semblance of peace. But if they accepted everything calmly, then he would have no cause for alarm and, with a bit of haste, could still make it to the station around 8 o'clock. At first he slipped and slid down the smooth chest of drawers repeatedly, but finally, summoning all his remaining strength, he gave himself one last determined swing and managed to stand upright. He was now completely oblivious to the throbbing pains in his lower body, no matter how intensely they stung. He let himself fall against the back of a nearby chair, bracing himself against its edge with his frail limbs. This afforded him a degree of control, and he maintained silence, for he could now clearly hear the manager's voice. "Did you understand a single word he said?" the manager demanded of Gregor's parents. "Is he mocking us?" "For God's sake," cried the mother, already dissolving into tears. "Perhaps he's terribly ill and we're only upsetting him further. Greta, Greta!" she shrieked, her voice laced with desperation. "Mother?" called the sister from the adjacent room. They were communicating through the barrier of Gregor's room. "You must fetch the doctor immediately. Gregor is sick. Hurry to the doctor. Have you heard Gregor speak?" That was an animal's voice, the manager stated, remarkably calm in comparison to the mother's hysteria. "Anna! Anna!" yelled the father through the hallway into the kitchen, clapping his hands together forcefully. "Fetch a locksmith at once!" The two young women were already scurrying through the hall, their skirts swishing with each hurried step. How had his sister managed to dress so quickly? And yanked open the doors of the apartment. No one heard the doors closing. They likely left them ajar, as is customary in a home struck by profound misfortune. However, Gregor had become considerably calmer. All right, so people could no longer decipher his words, even though they seemed perfectly clear to him. Clearer than ever before, perhaps because his ears had acclimated to them. But at least people now acknowledged that something was terribly wrong and were preparing to assist him. The confidence and decisiveness with which the initial arrangements were being made instilled a sense of relief within him. He felt integrated once more into the human fold and anticipated, without making any precise distinction between the two, splendid and surprising results from both the doctor and the locksmith. To ensure the clearest possible voice for the critical conversation that was about to unfold, he coughed lightly, taking extra care to do so in a subdued manner, as it was entirely possible that even this sound might be misinterpreted as something other than a human cough. He no longer trusted his own judgment in such matters. Meanwhile, the next room had fallen into an eerie silence. Perhaps his parents were seated with the manager at the table, whispering conspiratorially. Perhaps they were all huddled against the door, eavesdropping. Gregor propelled himself slowly toward the door, using the easy chair as leverage. He released his grip, threw himself against the door, and held himself upright, the pads of his tiny limbs possessing a slightly sticky texture. He paused there momentarily, catching his breath from the exertion. Then he made a concerted effort to turn the key in the lock with his mouth. Unfortunately, it became apparent that he lacked any real teeth. How then was he to grasp the key? But to compensate, his jaws possessed considerable natural strength. With their assistance, he managed to get the key moving, oblivious to the damage he was clearly inflicting upon himself. A brown fluid seeped from his mouth, flowing over the key and dripping onto the floor. "Just listen for a moment," said the manager in the next room, his voice hushed. "He's turning the key." For Gregor, this was a significant encouragement, but they should have all called out to him, including his father and mother. "Come on, Gregor," they should have shouted. "Keep going, keep working on the lock." Imagining that his every effort was being observed with bated breath, he bit down frantically on the key with all the force he could muster. As the key turned further, he danced around the lock, his body contorting in the confined space. Oh, he was supporting himself solely with his mouth, forced to cling to the key or press it down again with the full weight of his body as needed. The quite distinct click of the lock as it finally snapped open jolted Gregor awake. Breathing heavily, he muttered to himself, "So I didn't need the locksmith after all." He then pressed his head against the door handle to fully open the door. Because he had to open the door in this manner, it was already ajar, revealing a partial view of the room before he himself was fully visible. He first had to maneuver himself slowly around the edge of the door, very carefully, of course, to avoid collapsing awkwardly onto his back right at the entrance. He was still absorbed in this challenging maneuver and had no time to attend to anything else when he heard the manager exclaim aloud, "Oh!" It sounded like the wind whistling through a narrow passage, and now he saw him nearest to the door, pressing his hand against his open mouth and receding slowly, as if compelled by an invisible, unwavering force. His mother, disregarding the manager's presence, she stood there with her hair disheveled, still bearing the marks of the night, with her hands clasped tightly together, was gazing at his father. She then took 2 tentative steps toward Gregor and collapsed right in the middle of her skirts, which spread out around her like a shroud, her face buried on her breast, completely hidden from view. His father clenched his fist, his expression hostile as if he desired to shove Gregor back into his room. He then glanced uncertainly around the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and wept so violently that his mighty chest shook. At this juncture, Gregor did not venture a single step into the room, but leaned his body from the inside against the firmly bolted wing of the door, so that only half his body was visible, along with his head tilted sideways, with which he peered out at the others. Meanwhile, the light had intensified. Standing out prominently across the street was a section of the endless gray-black building opposite. It was a hospital, with its severe uniform windows punctuating the facade. The rain was still falling, but now only in large individual drops that visibly and resolutely struck the ground one by one. The breakfast dishes remained stacked haphazardly on the table, because for his father, breakfast was the most important meal of the day, which he prolonged for hours by perusing various newspapers. Directly across on the opposite wall hung a photograph of Gregor from his time in military service. It was a picture of him as a lieutenant, smiling and carefree, with his hand resting on his sword, projecting an image of respect for his bearing and uniform. The door to the hall was slightly ajar, and since the door to the apartment was also open, one could see out into the landing and the beginning of the staircase descending downwards. "Now," said Gregor, acutely aware that he was the only one who had maintained his composure, "I'll get dressed right away, pack up the collection of samples, and set off. You'll permit me to leave, won't you? You see, Mr. Manager, I am not stubborn, and I am eager to work. Traveling is exhausting, but I cannot imagine my life without it." "Where are you going, Mr. Manager? To the office? Really? Will you report everything truthfully? A person can be temporarily incapable of work, but that is precisely the best time to reflect upon past achievements and to remember that later, once the obstacles have been overcome, the person will work with even greater enthusiasm and dedication. I'm truly indebted to Mr. Chief. You know that perfectly well. On the other hand, I am deeply concerned about my parents and my sister. I'm in a difficult situation, but I'll find my way out of it. Please, don't make things more difficult for me than they already are. Speak up on my behalf at the office. People have a prejudice against traveling salesmen. I know that. They believe they earn exorbitant amounts of money and lead a privileged life. People don't even have any particular reason to examine this judgment more closely, but you, Mr. Manager, you possess a superior understanding of the interconnectedness of things compared to others, even, I tell you in complete confidence, a better understanding than Mr. Chairman himself, who in his capacity as the employer might allow his judgment to make casual errors at the expense of an employee. You also know well enough that the traveling salesman who spends almost the entire year outside the office can easily become a victim of gossip, coincidences, and unfounded complaints, against which he is unable to defend himself, since he mostly remains unaware of them until he's exhausted after completing a trip and then experiences the unpleasant consequences at home, consequences that cannot be thoroughly traced back to their origins. Mr. Manager, please don't leave without assuring me that you at least acknowledge that I am somewhat in the right." But at Gregor's initial words, the manager had already turned away, and now he glanced back at Gregor over his twitching shoulders with pursed lips. Throughout Gregor's entire speech, he remained in constant motion, moving away towards the door without ever breaking eye contact with Gregor, but proceeding slowly, As if a secret prohibition prevented him from leaving the room abruptly, he was already in the hall, and after the sudden movement with which he finally extracted his foot from the living room, one might have thought that he had just burned the sole of his foot. In the hall, however, he extended his right hand away from his body toward the staircase as if some truly supernatural salvation awaited him there. Gregor realized that he must not, under any circumstances, allow the manager to depart in this frame of mind, especially if he wished to preserve his position within the firm. His parents did not fully comprehend this situation. Over the years, they had developed the unwavering belief that Gregor was guaranteed lifelong employment in his firm, and furthermore, they were currently so preoccupied with their immediate troubles that all long-term planning was alien to them. But Gregor possessed this foresight. The manager had to be restrained, calmed, convinced, and ultimately won over. The future of Gregor and his family hinged upon it. If only his sister were present. She was clever. She had already wept while Gregor was still lying motionless on his back, and the manager, this admirer of women, would certainly have allowed himself to be guided by her. She would have closed the door to the apartment and soothed his fears in the hall. But his sister was nowhere to be found. Gregor was compelled to handle this matter himself, without considering that he was still uncertain about his current ability to move and without dwelling on the possibility that his speech had once again been misunderstood. He left the wing of the door, squeezed himself through the opening, and attempted to approach the manager, who was already clinging tightly to the handrail with both hands on the landing, looking utterly ridiculous. But as he searched for something to grasp, Gregor emitted a small scream and immediately tumbled down onto his numerous little legs. Scarcely had this occurred when he experienced, for the first time that morning, a general sense of physical well-being. The small limbs felt solid ground beneath them. They obeyed him perfectly, as he noticed with a surge of joy, and diligently strove to carry him forward in the direction he intended. He immediately believed that the final alleviation of all his suffering was imminent, but at the precise moment when he lay on the floor, rocking gently back and forth quite close and directly across from his mother, who appeared completely lost in her own thoughts, she abruptly sprang up, her arms flung wide and her fingers extended, and cried out, "Help, for God's sake, help!" She lowered her head as if attempting to gain a better view of Gregor, but then ran senselessly backward, contradicting that gesture, forgetting that the table with all the dishes stood behind her. Upon reaching the table, she collapsed heavily onto it as if absent-mindedly, and seemed oblivious to the fact that coffee was pouring out onto the carpet in a full stream from the large overturned container next to her. "Mother, mother," said Gregor quietly, and looked over towards her. The manager had momentarily vanished completely from his thoughts. By contrast, at the sight of the flowing coffee, he couldn't resist snapping his jaws in the air a few times. At that, his mother screamed again, hurried away from the table, and collapsed into the arms of his father, who was rushing toward her. But Gregor had no time right now for his parents. The manager was already on the staircase. His chin level with the banister, the manager glanced back for the last time. Gregor made an initial movement to catch up to him if possible, but the manager must have suspected something because he leaped down over a few stairs and disappeared, still shouting, "Huh!" The sound echoed throughout the entire stairwell. Now, unfortunately, this flight of the manager also seemed to completely disorient his father, who earlier had been relatively calm. Instead of pursuing the manager himself, or at the very least refraining from hindering Gregor's pursuit, he seized the manager's cane, which he had left behind with his hat and overcoat on a chair. With his left hand, his father picked up a large newspaper from the table and, stamping his feet on the floor, he set out to drive Gregor back into his room by waving the cane and the newspaper. No plea from Gregor was of any use. No plea would even be understood. No matter how earnestly he tried to turn his head respectfully, his father just stomped all the harder with his feet. Across the room from him, his mother had flung open a window despite the cool weather, and leaning out with her hands on her cheeks, she pushed her face far outside the window. Now Gregor had no experience at all in moving backward. It was progressing very slowly. Greg finally ends, perhaps but when naturally he would. Behind Gregor, the sound was at this point no longer like the voice of only a single father. Now it was truly no longer a joke, and Gregor forced himself, come what may, into the door. One side of his body was lifted up. He lay at an angle in the door opening. His one flank was sore from the scraping. On the white door, ugly blotches were left. Soon he was stuck fast and would not have been able to move any more on his own. The tiny legs on one side hung twitching in the air above. The ones on the other side were pressed painfully into the floor. Then his father gave him one truly strong, liberating push from behind, and he scurried, bleeding severely, far into the interior of his room. The door was slammed shut with the cane, and finally, it was quiet. Chapter 2. Gregor first woke up from his heavy, swoon-like sleep in the evening twilight. He would certainly have woken up soon afterward without any disturbance, for he felt sufficiently rested and wide awake, although it appeared to him as if a hurried step and a cautious closing of the door to the hall had aroused him. The shine of the electric streetlights lay pale here and there on the ceiling and on the higher parts of the furniture, but underneath around Gregor it was dark. Before leaving this tour of regions and beliefs, it's worth noting how the hunt often exists at the very edge of sight, lingering in the periphery of perception. Many witnesses claim to have heard far more than they actually saw. The sky can appear busy and teeming with activity, yet still remain empty to the naked eye. The ear, in contrast, receives the lesson more quietly, more insistently. Hoofbeats in snow are both heavy and strangely muffled. Horns ride on the wind, arriving with a distinctive curve, a shape that defies linear trajectory. Dogs sing with a timbre that twists at the very end, rising like a question left unanswered. The hunt teaches primarily through sound because sound is how humans first learned to discern what was coming in the darkness, to anticipate what lay beyond the reach of the firelight. The next movement shifts from place to meaning, from geography to interpretation. The motifs we have traced across the landscape coalesce into a set of behaviors for the living, a practical guide for navigating the dangers of the winter nights. What to do when the hunt draws near, what not to do when the year is turning, how to read a storm, how to listen for the sound of a bell, how to receive a gift from the other world, and how to refuse one. These rules might seem like the simple laws of a householder, guidelines for daily living. They are, in fact, something more profound, a theology in plain clothes, a hidden system of belief. A community learns to safeguard its collective soul through acts as simple as closing a shutter before nightfall, and as challenging as admitting that not every path is meant for the living. We will also consider the way these tales use fear, not to terrify for its own sake, but to place human life within a larger, more meaningful frame. The hunt is often depicted as a punishment in these stories, but it can also be seen as a form of care, however harsh, that moves the unquiet along, guiding them towards their final destination. It serves as a constant reminder to the living that the world is not solely theirs to inhabit. Between the sounds of the bells and the wailing of the horns, a constant conversation unfolds, a dialogue about order, about justice, about mercy. The seasons of stillness, the hunt gives that conversation a voice that the entire countryside can hear and cannot easily forget. When people speak about the hunt, they invariably return to the same set of senses. The ears are the first to perceive its approach. Hoofbeats gather like the distant drumming of a village a person cannot see. The calls of the hounds possess a pitch that constricts the throat, evoking a primal unease. The sound of the horns rides on the wind, taking shape in the chest long before it reaches the ear, resonating deep within the body. The very texture of the air seems to shift, becoming charged with an unseen presence. A door seems thinner, more permeable. A window seems to breathe in sync with the observer. Even the ground beneath one's feet feels lighter, as if something has just passed overhead, pulling the weight up with it. Or perhaps it arrives first, before the sound. Follows a consequence of the subtle shifts in the air, a reaction to a presence that has moved in unseen. From awe, the mind turns to conduct, to the accumulated wisdom of generations. The old advice is both severe and strangely tender. Close the house securely before nightfall. Bank the fire so that it warms but does not shout, drawing unwanted attention. Put tools back in their designated places. Coil the lines of the fishing nets. Cover sharp points. Leave nothing hanging outside that could catch a rider's stirrup or a hound's paw. If you must venture out, walk with purpose and with few stops. And above all, do not sing. If the sound of the hunt comes close, do not lift your face to the sky. Step to the edge of the road or to the nearest hedge, and make yourself small, insignificant. The lesson isn't cowardice, it is a form of ancient courtesy, a respect for powers that are merely passing through. Some rules, while appearing to be acts of kindness towards the living, also function as a form of armor against the unseen. Bring animals inside early, the stable be swept clean, the water bucket filled to the brim. A lantern set outside the cowshed creates a small island of order and light in the encroaching darkness. In tales that remember this practice, the lantern becomes a symbol respected by the wild company. The household that tends to its own affairs is left undisturbed. The one that neglects the simple tasks of care might find milk spoiled and calves startled, as if the host had brushed past them with a sleeve of cold wind, leaving a lingering reminder that care in all its forms matters. Sound answers sound. The bells of a household reply to the wailing of the horns, not the joyous peal of a festival, but the steady, deliberate strike that proclaims that a community is awake, vigilant. Bells are boundaries made audible, expanding the reach of a doorframe, pushing the edges of safety outwards into the encroaching dusk. In some places, people walk the perimeter of their property with a handbell, its rhythm as even and deliberate as the beating of a heart at rest. Others crack whips, stitching sound into the very fabric of the air. The point wasn't to provoke or fight, it was to assert the existence of an order that would not crumble under the weight of a passing clamor. Offerings carry a gentler, more compassionate logic. Bread set near a threshold whispers, "We have enough to share with those who are hungry and passing through." A small cup of ale acknowledges respect for travelers, even if one cannot invite them inside. The gifts are not meant as bribes, but as acts of acknowledgement, as gestures of connection in a world often defined by separation. In stories where voices answer the offerings, the thanks are typically brief and unadorned. Sometimes the gift is left untouched, proving that the act was intended primarily for the comfort of the living hearts within the house, not for the satisfaction of the spectral riders. Sometimes the offering is taken, and no harm befalls the household that winter, which is in itself a form of response, a subtle blessing. Taboos guard edges that humans cannot see, protecting vulnerable boundaries. The rule about laundry left hanging out on the line is both humble and firm. Cloth on a line is a net, a means of catching things. Nets catch what they are not intended to catch. If the company becomes entangled in the snare, the snag becomes a claim. The house that left the line exposed has essentially invited trouble. The same instinct guides the rule regarding unfinished spinning. A distaff with fiber half drawn sends a signal to the world that time itself doesn't matter within that room. During the raw liminal nights, however, time matters in a profoundly different way. Work rests not out of laziness, but out of deference to the season's sensitive borders. Iron and steel fall into the category of common sacraments, objects that retain their daily utility while simultaneously gaining another, more profound layer of meaning. A bit of iron set beneath the threshold is still metal, heavy and honest in its composition, yet it also serves as a clear signal to anything that might pass that this house is firmly grounded in the work of the day. You meet us on ground where plows and nails shape the world. The hunt respects that language or recoils from it entirely. Either outcome, in its own way, protects the living. A knife placed under a pillow isn't intended as a weapon against the dead, but as a tangible token of alignment with the labor, the creation, overseen by the daylight. Crossroads complicate the map, becoming liminal spaces in themselves. They are blessed by the shape of the cross, yet also feared for their openness, their vulnerability. Some tales whisper, "Reach a crossing and you are safe," because intersecting lines meet under a sign of mercy. Others claim that the hunt lays claim to crossroads, because at such places the roads themselves seem to forget which direction they are supposed to point. Travelers in these stories wisely choose edges over centers, headdress over open nodes, for edges accept, edges forgive. They are partial, imperfect, and therefore more readily accommodating. They are not overwhelmed by the endless possibilities of choice. A hedge can belong to a person. A crossroads, however, belongs to the world and to no one for a short while. Not every encounter with the hunt ends in suffering or loss. There are stories, rare and precious, that sit like small lamps amidst the darkness, illuminating the path forward. A hunter, hearing the spectral company approach, stands hat in hand, head bowed, and is brushed by a coldness that feels strangely like a blessing, a benediction. By morning, there is meat at the door, a gift left by the passing hunt. Sometimes it transforms into gold for a single day, then returns to ashes, reminding him that gratitude cannot be banked. Sometimes it sustains a family through a particularly lean week, and the moral becomes undeniably clear. Courtesy can season fear, diluting its bitterness. Cannot abolish it entirely, but it can create a space within it, allowing providence to move and act. Interference, however, is fundamentally different from mere courtesy. The hunt drops nothing without a reason. To snatch at a bridle or a dropped pouch, to set your own hounds upon a carcass that does not rightfully belong to you, to attempt to turn the spear of a rider whose purpose is not yours. These acts invariably bring a fitting punishment to the hand that reached out, that transgressed, mark that refuses to heal, a persistent numbness of mind, a year lived in absolute silence with the crushing understanding that you will never, ever repeat that mistake. The lessons are severe because they protect a vital border. Some work belongs solely to the dead, to the forces beyond our comprehension. Proof, tangible evidence matters deeply in a culture that readily argues about visions and interpretations. Stories accrue concrete tokens, physical objects, in order to survive the skeptical light of mourning. Scars possess their own undeniable eloquence. A wound that refuses to fully close, left by a ghostly blade, becomes a memory that the body retains long after the tongue grows weary of recounting the tale. Broken branches found in places where no one passed in daylight are often enough to convince doubting neighbors who wanted nothing more than to laugh. A wet imprint of a hoof in a yard stamped across a patch of frost that should have held its pristine white crust until noon is enough to instill a hushed silence throughout an entire village for a week. Proof isn't just evidence, it is a form of courtesy extended to listeners, a gesture of respect. Storms give the hunter substance, a palpable presence. Wind whips at fences, leaving them flattened, and fields appear trampled, violated. People stir from sleep, whispering that they have witnessed the spectral host, and the ravaged earth seems to confirm their visions. The somber pronouncements of old sermons would label such occurrences as divine judgment. The gentler voices of neighbors interpret them as reminders delivered without malice. In both instances, the physical world is imbued with narrative. This is a way of rendering the damage, the inexplicable, more bearable. If a company of souls has swept through, pressing the flax into the mud, then the loss is not a random act of cruelty, but a part of a story, and the human mind finds a measure of solace. Timing weaves these tales together across the landscape. Winter most often carries the host on its frigid breath. The 12 nights after Christmas form the very spine of the haunting season. Autumn, too, claims its share, especially around All Hallows' Eve when names are spoken aloud and candles multiply, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The night between seasons is a liminal road, and the wild hunt uses roads. Communities, knowingly or unknowingly, prepare themselves for these events. The smoking of a house with herbs offers both a cleansing scent and a potent form of preventative theology. The reverent pause after a church bell's peal is both a gesture of etiquette and a prayer for protection. Festivals held in the depths of winter become rehearsals for the passing of powers far older than the town itself. In this social universe, the wild hunt acts as a mirror, reflecting both virtues and their neglect. Industrious families sleep soundly, undisturbed. Those who disrupt the peace with needless noise find their nights filled with unsettling taps and whispers along the roof slates. Those who desecrate holy time with ostentatious displays of labor are met by a wind that rearranges their yards into a chaotic tableau, a penance they must undo. The accumulated beliefs add up to a polite yet emphatic request written in large script across the midnight sky. The request is simple: maintain proportion, respect the rhythm of the year, allow limits to be teachers, not adversaries. The church, too, learns to interpret these nights in its own way. Early voices within the clergy sought to dismiss the tales, branding them as the deceptions of a liar, the work of the devil. Later voices, confronted with vivid testimony from their congregations, conceded that the living might be witnessing something permitted as a warning, a glimpse beyond the veil. The language of penance grew alongside the doctrine of purgatory, of specific places and times after death. Processions of souls became thinkable, not merely as fantasies or tricks of the light, but as moral pageants that the world might be allowed to observe. Then the tone hardened. Many preachers began to denounce the spectral riders as devils, agents of darkness. People listened to their priests, but they also continued to listen to the wind, to the rustling leaves, to the unspoken anxieties that haunted the long nights. That tension, that unresolved ambiguity, is part of the wild hunt's enduring power. It exists in a space that doctrine cannot fully encompass, a territory of liminality. Are these souls in need of prayer and succor, or are they malevolent entities to be rebuked and banished? A villager who lights a candle at the window when the sound of the hunt draws near is not consciously debating the answer. He is holding both possibilities simultaneously. He is warding off evil, and he is offering a prayer for the lost. He is guarding his house, and he is wishing rest to those who find none. The ambivalence is not born of confusion, but of a charity seasoned with caution. It keeps communities humane in the face of the unquiet, the things that go bump in the night. The wild hunt also polices status without explicitly naming names. A king condemned to ride forever for his hubris serves as a chilling reminder to a laborer that rank cannot erase debt, that earthly power is fleeting. A priest who appears among the host warns the faithful that holy office does not grant immunity from the consequences of sin. A noble hunter who profanes the Sabbath and is punished accordingly serves as a cautionary tale for men who possess more land than patience. In these ways, the wild hunt serves the interests of public order by imagining a kind of cosmic enforcement, a set of unwavering moral laws written into the fabric of the universe. It is not a threat flung downward from on high, but a narrative applied equally to all. The wind will read every roofline in a town without prejudice, without favoritism. Children sometimes ask whether the wild hunt ever brings a gift, anything other than fear and sorrow. Stories answer softly with hushed voices. Yes, sometimes a lantern lit and held on a threshold as the sound of the hunt passes by can leave a house feeling inexplicably warm for weeks, as if an invisible hand has smoothed its walls, erasing the anxieties that had clung to them like cobwebs. A respectful bow offered to the empty road where spectral hoofbeats echo can remove a small, lingering bitterness from a man's heart, replaced by a private grace that allows him to speak more gently the next morning. Such outcomes are called blessings to distinguish them from mere winnings, from undeserved fortune. They cannot be demanded, only recognized with gratitude. Grief, too, finds a home in these nights. Those who have recently lost someone listen more carefully to the sounds on the wind, hoping perhaps to hear a familiar voice among the spectral riders. The council of elders in such moments is intentionally modest, hesitant to offer facile platitudes. Do not call out the name, Assissis, they advise. Do not run into the yard. Sit and keep the candle burning. If you hear the hounds, remember that what is being done is necessary, that the hunt serves a purpose beyond our understanding. If a memory tugs you toward the door, give the moment a breath and then breathe again. The host is not a reunion, a chance to undo loss. It is a passage, a transition. The way to honor it is to remain in the house that love built and to keep it whole, to protect its integrity against the encroaching darkness. If all this sounds like a carefully constructed domestic code wrapped in grand, unsettling imagery, that is precisely what it is. The wild hunt is one of the ways a community teaches itself how to live well during the hardest weeks of the year, how to navigate the long nights of winter. Uses fear without descending into gratuitous cruelty. It uses awe without succumbing to idolatry. It elevates common, everyday tasks into sacred rites. Sweep the floor, bank the hearth, fold the linens, call the children in from the gathering gloom, stand for a moment in the doorway and listen to the wind, not to master it, but to hear what it asks, what it demands. Then close the door with a hand that knows its own strength, that understands the limits of human power in the face of the unknown. Behind these practices, behind these rituals, waits a deeper, more fundamental question. What is the hunt, really? Is it the faded memory of a pagan god in a world transformed by Christianity? Is it the church's moving allegory about sin and consequence, about the wages of wrongdoing? Or is it something more complex, a woven tapestry, a cloak stitched together from countless older and newer scraps of belief and folklore? The debate has shadowed the motif as long as people have written about it, as long as stories have been told around crackling fires. Some have sought a single definitive source, a clear origin. Others are content with a chorus of voices with a multiplicity of interpretations. The truth in practice is that the hunt has always been a kind of library, a vast room where countless books sit on the same shelf, borrowed and reinterpreted in different seasons, read aloud in different voices. In the final movement of our exploration, we will open the doors of that library. We will listen to the arguments about origins and meanings, about the true nature of the wild hunt. We will examine the claims that the hunt is a shard of a very ancient faith, a nocturnal procession led by a forgotten deity, or that it is a purely medieval creation, a product of religious imagination sharpened by fire and brimstone sermons. They merely, the winter, he got the idea, people like, he a third, the point, others, they grant a winter, no one can draw a straight, unbroken line from them to the medieval reports of the wild hunt. Yet are they later, the people, then they, another, a few, if we see it turns winter into a season of heightened attention, a time for vigilance and reflection. It grants villagers a script for caution and for care, a set of practices designed to protect them from the dangers, both real and imagined, that lurk in the darkness. It teaches that boundaries matter, that there are limits that must not be crossed. It suggests that some knights, some warriors, belong to a realm beyond the visible, that the forces of order extend beyond the reach of earthly authority. It gives the clergy a language for visible penance, a way to dramatize the consequences of sin. It gives families a reason to complete small domestic tasks with love and care, to create a haven of warmth and safety against the encroaching cold. It gives children a story that links the sound of the wind to a rule that keeps them close to home until morning returns with its ordinary light, chasing away the shadows. The ritual calendar gathers all these lessons into practice, weaving them into the fabric of everyday life. The smoking of rooms with herbs during the raw nights of winter becomes both an act of cleanliness and a ritual of protection, a fragrant bulwark against unseen forces. The refusal to leave cloth outdoors becomes both an expression of order and an act of reverence, a recognition that certain spaces, certain times are sacred. The habit of ringing bells near midnight becomes both a marker of community and an expression of courage, a defiant assertion of hope in the face of darkness, outness. At the year's turn is not mere bravado, but relief and gratitude sounded into the vast expanse of the sky, a joyful noise made to ward off the lingering shadows of the past year. When masked runners churn snow into sparks of sound, they are acting out a drama far older than the parade itself, chasing away stale fear and ushering the next round of days into the town, welcoming the promise of spring. Modern communities keep the image of the wild hunt alive in ways that blend memory and performance, tradition and innovation. Mountain valleys send out processions of horned masks, their wearers adorned with cowbells strapped to their hips, their movements echoing the ancient rhythm of the hunt. Fire jars cast an orange light on white breath and wooden faces, transforming the familiar world into a realm of myth and legend. The spectacle drives winter backward by a pace or two, asserting the power of human will against the forces of nature. It also honors the dark with just enough fear to feel honest, to acknowledge the inherent mystery of the world. Families still fold laundry early in some places, remembering the old warnings. Elders still say to children that the dogs of the other world will be hunting tonight, their baying carried on the wind. The remark does not require literal belief. It teaches caution and wonder, a respect for the unknown. New spiritual movements borrow the imagery of the wild hunt and soften its edges, adapting it to their own unique beliefs and practices. Some treat the winter procession as a ride of honored ancestors, a celestial homecoming rather than a troop of the damned. They speak of riding with the host in meditation, of letting old griefs be gathered and carried beyond the horizon, released into the vastness of the universe. They take the stern lady of the hunt and transform her into a guardian, a powerful protector who tests but also blesses those who are worthy. They take the old wanderer, the restless spirit condemned to roam the earth, and call him a teacher of limits and passage, a guide to the underworld. The moral tone changes, becoming more forgiving, more compassionate. The music stays. Hounds still cry in the wind, horns still lift the hair on the neck, sending shivers down the spine. Bells still answer, echoing across the darkened landscape. Art and story have taken the wild hunt into other worlds, into realms of imagination where anything is possible. Painters depict riders surging through storm clouds, their spears held at an angle that doubles as lightning, their faces illuminated by an unearthly glow. Poets set spectral hooves upon the rhyme, riding stanzas into gloomy hills, conjuring visions of ancient battles and forgotten gods. Novelists transform the wild hunt into a company of fey knights, ethereal beings who step between dimensions, who wear skulls as crowns and wield swords forged from starlight. Songs move the hunt to a western range, swapping devils for cattle and cowboys, turning the ancient myth into a modern ballad. Yet the core lesson survives, resonating across centuries and cultures. If you fall in with that company, you are lost to the living, forever bound to the spectral host. The chorus tells it plain, and young voices learn the words by heart, passing down the tradition to future generations. Games place the host behind masks of steel, setting them on a virtual board where the player must decide whether to run or to turn and fight, to confront the darkness or to succumb to its allure. The visual language is remarkably faithful to the original legends. Black horses with pale eyes, riders who seem to embody both storm and bone, hounds that blossom from the fog and close a circle while horns draw a line, trapping the unwary in their spectral snare. The moral language is thinner, more simplistic, because play needs conflict more than penance, action more than reflection. Yet the atmosphere carries the old charge, the frisson of fear and awe that has always been associated with the wild hunt. A generation meets the hunt first as entertainment, as a thrilling diversion, and afterward learns that it is also a winter sermon, a cautionary tale spoken by an entire continent, a reminder of the enduring power of myth and legend. Museums and festivals treat the wild hunt as a significant part of the cultural heritage, a valuable piece of the past to be preserved and celebrated. Carved masks sit behind glass displays, their cowbells resting silently at their feet, their wooden faces frozen in expressions of eternal menace. Curators write learned essays about liminal time and communal catharsis, about the ways in which the wild hunt allows communities to confront their fears and anxieties in a safe and controlled environment. Tourism boards invite visitors to walk a forest where a horned ghost once rattled chains, to experience the eerie atmosphere of a landscape haunted by legend. Churches bless bells during the cold months, reciting ancient words that carry a memory of storm, a whisper of the wild hunt that still echoes in the air. Every one of these gestures, every one of these practices, proves that the wild hunt answers a fundamental human need, that it speaks to something deep within the collective psyche. It makes fear visible and manageable, giving it a form that can be confronted and perhaps even overcome. It keeps old names alive, ensuring that the stories of the past are not forgotten. It gives the year a shoulder to lean on during its longest night, a way to navigate the darkness with courage and hope. Some questions remain open, unanswered, and will likely stay open indefinitely. The true path of a word that sounds like Helen, a word associated with death and the underworld, refuses to be nailed down, resists any attempt to confine it to a single definitive origin. The story of the British king called Herne, doomed to wander the earth for eternity, and the French captain called Hellequin, leader of a spectral band of warriors, may share a common root, or they may have borrowed from each other across a narrow sea where stories leap like sparks from one shore to the other. The order in which the ideas moved, the direction of the cultural exchange, is not entirely clear. What is clear is that people wanted a name for the company that passes in the night, a label for the terrifying spectacle that haunted their dreams. They found one that tastes of iron and ash when spoken, a word that carries the weight of centuries of fear and fascination. That is enough to keep it alive, to ensure its survival. The balance between punishment and protection, between the terrifying and the comforting aspects of the wild hunt, is also forever unresolved, forever in flux. A few tales inscribe fertility into the hunt, suggesting that the mere passage of the riders could quicken fields, awakening the dormant seeds, or bless herds, ensuring their prosperity. Many more keep the emphasis firmly on fear and moral correction, on the consequences of sin and the need for repentance. Perhaps the truth is seasonal, shifting with the rhythms of the year. In the hardest months, when the days are short and the nights are long, the hunt takes the shape of a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the darkness. Just after the turn toward light, when the first signs of spring begin to appear, The host can be felt as a sweep that clears out stale airs, that purges the world of lingering negativity, freeing a little space for growth and renewal. Paradox is not a flaw, not a sign of weakness or inconsistency. It is a sign that a living tradition is capable of adjusting to changing needs, of adapting to new circumstances. It is evidence of the tradition's enduring power and its ability to resonate with people across generations. Turn now in your imagination to a winter night, to a small village nestled in the heart of a snow-covered valley. The village is quiet, the houses huddled together against the encroaching cold. Smoke writes careful lines above the roofs, rising into the still night air like prayers. A dog in a yard lifts its nose and listens, its ears twitching, sensing something beyond the reach of human perception. Far off in the distance, the air gathers into a rhythm, a subtle vibration that is not quite wind, not quite anything that can be easily explained. The sound grows slowly but inexorably, and then pulls sideways as if slipping between layers of sky, traversing the hidden pathways of the night. Somewhere a bell answers with measured strokes, its somber tones echoing across the frozen landscape. The doorways that hold families, the thresholds that separate the domestic world from the wild unknown, step forward a little in spirit, as if to say, "We are here and we are ready. We have prepared ourselves for this moment. We have done what we can to protect our homes and our loved ones." The sound passes, fading into the distance. The stillness returns, settling over the village like a blanket of snow. The world has been both threatened and steadied, both terrified and reassured, and both truths matter, both experiences are valid. An old man sits by the hearth, telling the youngest child that the riders keep order, that they ensure that justice is served in the world. "We cannot keep to ourselves," he says, his voice low and steady. "We need help from forces beyond our understanding." A woman refills a small cup on the sill, leaving an offering for the passing spirits, and smiles at her own habit, recognizing the comfort it brings. A shepherd sleeps without fear, knowing that his flock is safely penned and his lantern burned low before he closed the shed, warding off the dangers of the night. The wild hunt does not end, not for them, not for anyone. It moves on to the next valley and the next, its spectral procession continuing its endless journey. What ends is the hour of focused attention, the period of heightened awareness, and what remains is a community that has practiced reverence for limits, a community that understands the importance of respecting the boundaries that separate the known from the unknown, the safe from the dangerous. It is as if that reverence were a kind of warmth, a protective shield against the encroaching cold. We have followed the wild hunt from early reports through regional variations to household rules and winter rites, through theological debates and artistic representations, and back to the listening door, the threshold where the human world meets the spectral realm. What remains is a way of hearing the world, a way of interpreting the signs and omens that surround us. When storms come, they can be weather or meaning, random acts of nature or divine pronouncements. When bells ring, they can be mere metal or expressions of mercy, comforting sounds that ward off the darkness. When dogs speak into the night, their barks echoing across the fields, they can be simply animals or omens, messengers from a realm beyond our comprehension. The wild hunt allows a community to hold both readings without breaking, to embrace the ambiguity and complexity of the world without succumbing to despair or cynicism. It trains the ear to humility, teaching us to listen to the voices that speak from beyond the realm of human understanding. It asks for tidiness and courage, for a willingness to confront the unknown with both caution and faith. It leaves behind a steadier kind of fear, a healthy respect for the forces that shape our lives. If you have never heard the wild hunt, never experienced the eerie sensation of its passing, imagine the feeling of it now. The air learns a rhythm before your body does, a subtle vibration that resonates deep within your bones. The room grows more quiet in response, as if holding its breath in anticipation. The skin on your arms thinks of cold, even if the fire is well fed, its flames dancing merrily in the hearth. You do what your elders taught you, following the ancient customs that have been passed down through generations. You check the latch, ensuring that the door is securely fastened. You speak a simple word for the restless and the lost, offering a prayer for those who cannot find peace. You remember the children sleeping in the next room, their innocent dreams undisturbed by the terrors of the night, and you feel how strong a wall can be when it is kept with care, When it is protected by love and vigilance, you listen until the sound recedes, until the wind dies down and the silence returns, and then you breathe slowly and deeply, as if the night had been holding you captive, as if you have just been released from its grasp. One last counsel moves with the riders wherever they travel, a set of guidelines for living a good and virtuous life. Live so that when the winter host passes over your home, it finds your house in order and your heart at peace, free from guilt and regret. Finish the work that belongs to the day, leaving no loose ends to entangle sorrow, no unfinished tasks to haunt your dreams. Keep a bell within reach, ready to sound an alarm if danger threatens. Know when to bow and when to be still, when to show respect and when to stand your ground. Trust that the powers that shape our lives are greater than ourselves, that some courts sit above our fields, dispensing a justice that is beyond our comprehension. Trust that offerings of bread and ale, left on the sill for the passing spirits, do not feed ghosts so much as they feed the living with the practice of generosity, with the knowledge that even in the darkest of times there is always something to share. Learn to listen for the horns without letting them master your mind, without allowing fear to consume you. The wind will always ride the long roads, carrying the voices of the past and the whispers of the future. Spectral hounds will always be heard by those who are ready to hear them, those who are attuned to the mysteries of the night. The year will always provide a handful of nights, fleeting moments when the boundaries between worlds grow thin, when the veil between the living and the dead is lifted, and even the most confident of us, even those who believe they have nothing to fear, sometimes feel a hand on the shoulder that is not entirely from this world, a gentle reminder of the forces that shape our lives. The wild hunt persists, enduring through centuries of change and upheaval, because it speaks to those hours of uncertainty, those moments of doubt and fear, without pretending to answer every question, without offering simplistic solutions to complex problems. It gives them shape, providing a framework for understanding the anxieties that haunt our dreams. It leads them on, guiding us through the darkness and offering a glimmer of hope in the face of despair. It tells us that time judges gently and firmly both, that mercy and justice are not mutually exclusive, but rather two sides of the same coin. It asks us to keep our doors with love, to protect our homes and families with care and vigilance until the hoofbeats fade and the sun rises again. When morning arrives, washing the world in its familiar light, the world looks ordinary again, transformed by the simple act of illumination. Fields carry frost that melts into shine, glittering like diamonds in the morning sun. The bell rope smells of hemp and clean hands, a reminder of the human labor that sustains our communities. A single thread left on a daffodil, a stray strand of silk fluttering in the breeze, is smoothed and tucked with care, a small act of order and beauty in a world filled with chaos. One finds a crust missing from a plate on a sill, a small offering left for the passing spirits, and laughs not because they literally believe a rider took it, but because hospitality feels right, even when it is not seen, even when it is offered to the unknown. The wild hunt will come again when the calendar turns, when winter returns to claim its dominion over the earth. Between now and then, the village will bury and marry and harvest and sing, celebrating the cycles of life and death that bind the community together. The door will hold, protected by love and tradition. The story will wait, passed down from generation to generation, ready to be retold when the time is right. In the end, the wild hunt is not simply a single legend, a static and unchanging narrative, but a discipline of attention, a way of engaging with the world that is both ancient and enduring. It teaches the body to be still without despair, to find a measure of peace in the face of uncertainty, teaches households to honor the limits that keep them safe and kind, to respect the boundaries that protect them from the dangers of the world. It teaches a village to translate storm into meaning without denying the damage a storm can do, to find a sense of purpose even in the midst of chaos. It gathers the dead into motion, acknowledging the power of the past to shape the present, and lets the living practice humility, reminding us that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. It honors bells and bread and the steady hand upon a latch, the simple acts of care and connection that sustain us through the darkest of times. It leaves us with a way to walk through winter nights that are both beautiful and frightening, to navigate the liminal spaces between worlds, and to come out whole on the other side, strengthened by the experience and prepared to face whatever challenges the future may hold.